I think this is most of us here today. I was going back through our messages, Mitch, and I realized I didn't really explain kind of our goals for this whole speaker series. So I guess really quick
Okay.
before we start, um, we initially kind of started as a group focused on racial disparities at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. But over the summer, we started reading Martha Nussbaum's Poetic Justice, and she really talks about the literary imagination and the role that this can have in public life. And so we became interested in kind of how we might begin to cultivate our own literary and moral imaginations as kind of aspiring physicians. And so
Mm,
we've kind of put together this little speaker series, and we have, we've been really lucky to have some great memoirists and other community leaders. So
okay.
we're really excited to have you here and kind of talk more about your book.
All right. Well, I'm game. Now let me know what you want to talk about.
I wanted to first introduce you to the whole audience if you like to.
Yeah, it's fine.
So, good evening, everybody. Johannes Abram. I'm a student at Settle Pacific University, and today I have the great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Mitchell S. Jackson. Professor Jackson was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. He holds both a bachelor degree in speech communication and a master's of arts in writing from Portland State University, and a master's of fine arts in creative writing from New York University. He has been teaching writing at NYU, Medgar Evers College, John Jay College, University of Chicago, Columbia University, and Arizona State University. He also works as a journalist, writing about entertainment and sports for Vibe, The Source, and various other publications. But Professor Jackson distinguished himself for using autobiographical fictions and personal memoirs to reflect traumas African experience, mainly due to structural racism. Very recently, his 12 Minutes in a Life has won the Dan Jenkins Medal for Excellence in Sports Writing and the 2021 Pulitzer Prize and National Magazine Award for Feature Writing. His book that we're going to discuss about, The Residue Years, was a finalist for the PEN Hemingway Award, the Flaherty Dana Nobel Prize, and the Hurston Wright Award for college writers. He currently lives in Brooklyn, New York, and is a father of two. So thank you all for being here tonight. Please feel free to send questions in the chat and help me welcome Professor Mitchell S. Jackson.
Thank you, Abraham. Thank you. Man, yeah, you dug deep into the bio for some of that info.
That was really impressive.
Let us know if you would like to add something on top of that.
No, not at all. You
Okay.
got it. You got it. I just had an event the other day with two really well-known writers, and they read their bios. They read all of our bios at the beginning of the conversation, and it took up so much time. It just it didn't seem necessary. So yeah, no, I'm good.
Awesome. So I think we had a general opening question for you, and then I think you wanted to start with reading a specific passage, and from there adding questions over questions.
Okay.
In general, so the first question is, writing the residue years, what were the goals for the emotional impact that you try to stimulate in the audience, if you set some of those goals before writing the book or while you were writing it?
Well, the thing about the residue years is it took so long to finish. It was a project that I started in 1997, and it came out in 2013. So I know y'all future physicians can do good math. That's a lot of years. I try not to even count how many years that is. And to be honest, my goal when I began writing the residue years, I was actually incarcerated. And all I really wanted to do was write my life story. And at the time, I was not a writer. I hadn't considered ever becoming a writer. I had never gone to a reading. I wasn't even really a reader. So it was probably foolish, at the least audacious, for me to think that I could write a book. But I did start setting down some really crappy fiction, and I paroled with that. And then I went back and got my bachelor's, as you mentioned, and I noticed that my alma mater, Portland State University, was starting an MFA program. I know this is a really long-winded answer, but it took me 13, 14 years to finish. So I figured I'd get at least 2 minutes on an answer. So it was another kind of I don't know, it wasn't disingenuous, but I did not go to graduate school to become a writer. I went to graduate school because, one, I thought it would be cool to live in my neighborhood and have a master's degree, because not a lot of people did. And two, because I had this book that I wanted to write. So I went there. I thought I was going to finish it up in 2 years. 2 years passed. I had no book. I had about 100 pages that were not very good at all. So that's why I went to NYU. Same thing, 2 more years passed. I had another maybe 100 pages. I still had no book. If you ask me what were my goals for the emotional impact, I wasn't even thinking about emotional impact. I was thinking about, how do I learn how to write this thing? And I think I was just teaching an interview of Gabriel Garcia Marquez in the Paris Review. And he said in there that, what did he say? He said, literature is just carpentry. And so one of the things that I have, I guess, come to believe is an idea close to that, which is that if you figure out how to make the thing, the kind of meaning or emotional impact comes out of that. So like, if you're dealing with the content that you care about and that there's some risk in it for you, and then you learn how to do these other craft things, you learn how to build it, you learn how to make a sentence or a paragraph, or you learn the structure of a story or how to write dialogue. Like, if you learn those things, then the emotional impact comes. But I didn't go into it thinking that, right? I went into it thinking about my ego, which you also really have to kind of, you have to take out of the writing process, because writing to me is the most humbling thing that you can do. Don't worry, all my answers won't be that long, man. I'll time them out. Don't worry about it.
No. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very interesting that the emotional impact came out naturally, basically, while you were writing down your story, and then, of course, it touches many hearts for everybody.
Well, I think you write, if you tell the truth, right? If you tell the truth about an experience that you're having, there is some other person in the world who has an experience that truth resonates with. So all you really got to do is sit down and tell the truth, right? And there will be some emotional impact for some people. Now, where you go wrong is trying to make something for everybody, because then you're lying, right? Because your personal experience does not resonate with everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why we wanted to start off our discussion with a particular scene that really resonated with us for the truths that you shared. So, do you wanna read it, Mike?
Yeah. So this is a scene that resonated with us. It was page 80. So I'll start. So it's like after the little speech, and then here it goes. Like, would anyone like to offer feedback, Haskins's, or ask a question? I sit up, roll my neck, press my toes to stretch my calves. The pugnacious earthy, the tangled hair, who stays shooting with me with a cryptic eye, shoots up a hand. You make it seem like some big conspiracy, she says. She pulls her knees to her chest, leaves her smallish boots hanging off the lip of her seat. As if America had some goal to put blacks in prison. Like, that's just so ridiculous, she says, and waves her hands past her eyes, like beyond ridiculous. I kind of agree, a dude from across the circle says. he doesn't raise his hand because shit, his t-shirt is 2 sizes too small and jeans are shrinked too snug. If he did, he might bust a seam. Hey, I'm just prejudiced or anything, he says, but it sounds like excuse making to me. Do you really think Congress has it out for blacks? Come on, bud, he says. People commit crimes and people go to jail. It's simple. Everything's not about race. If this were another year, my freshman or sophomore or junior year, those quarters, my brain's alchemy was tweaked by a legion of Black Studies courses. You'd be surprised by how riled the right reading list can make you. If this was then, those days I spent stalking campus with a militant scowl, I'd say something to set dude's snug-ass jeans aflame. But this ain't then, it's now, my year. And the real is, no matter what I say, white folks won't ever hate themselves like us. You're right, not everything's about race, I say. But what if it is? No one else says another word. So I think we really resonated with this passage because we really feel the weight of it. And like on the surface, this story might be about cycles of poverty and addiction, and the loss of your home and the family and the community faces is as a result of the institutionalized racism. So this kind of like connects to a question about gentrification that we have, like on page 91, famous notes that like after the flood, gentrification caused white folks to live on one side of the city and black folks to live on the other side. And then there's like palpable effects of gentrification where one group is unable to afford rent and they get displaced, but his peers don't really see the effects of gentrification. So like a question is like, how can we educate the community so they can like see the effects of the gentrification, and like what residual effects of gentrification are still present today in terms of health?
Oh, you hit me with a triple question, man. Okay, let me start with, first of all, to hear you read back the words that I wrote probably 15 years ago is, I don't know, it's a really remarkable experience. Because, you know, sometimes I'll forget what I said. And I think that is a situation which holds true in many classrooms. I'm sure that you can go to some less liberal classrooms and people think, yeah, it's just about, you know, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and why can't you all do it? We did it, which is, you know, obviously the privilege, right, that people have. Talking about gentrification, like I think one, for me, the word just obfuscates what is actually happening. Like, I don't think it's a word that you can decipher what's happening by just hearing the word. When I first heard it, I had no idea what it really meant. And I think, you know, when I hear words like white flight, right? You all heard white flight before, like that's pretty easy to decipher, right? Like white people are fleeing. So I feel like they can make just an easy phrase for us to figure out what's happening with gentrification. When you talk about educating people, though, I think that is the word that most scares a lot of people. I'm on a text chain with a bunch of my childhood friends, and all of them, yeah, everybody's college educated, but not everyone has a profession in which they have to engage intellectually every day with other people's thoughts and arguments. And so I was making a case for vaccinations. And then I was saying, they were like, well, you know, if your money is messed up or if some other reason, like, yeah, you should get the shot. And I was like, it's a personal choice. And I was like, yeah, I do agree that it's a personal choice. But I said, but if you live in a society, your personal choice becomes everybody's personal choice, right? Like if you living off the grid, go ahead. You living in a cabin somewhere, you never see another human being, do whatever you want to do. But the minute that you step into the world, and I was making this claim on my text thread, and at a certain point, one of them, my friends was like, man, I'm too old for people to be preaching. And I think that is the way that most people feel, where you try to present them with information that they are resistant to. So the minute that you say, I'm educating someone on gentrification, like you probably already have gone the wrong way, unless they want to be a student, right? And that's a very particular person who considers themselves to be a student. So I think if there are ways to usher, or a person gets in a bad position, right? So like Champ trying to buy the home, watching the white guy come in and losing the home, I think he would be receptive to learning about gentrification. So if you catch a person at the right time, then they're open to education. But I think just pulling somebody aside and saying, here, I have this information that you don't, like, I don't know if that's gonna work.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the response. You really have to not really like push information. You have to like have them absorb it in a sense.
Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah, that's the difficult part.
Right. Y'all seen those guys that are like on the side of the street with signs and they telling you about the end of the world or how you need to get with Jesus or Palestine or Israel. Like they might have all the information, but no one is listening to them, right? Like they got the 5% in New York, like they got a crowd of about 10 people, but that's it. Everybody else just walking right on by.
All right, thank you.
All right, I have a question.
Okay. Your pops is on there, huh? You're like, I gotta have a question today.
No, man.
Mhm.
On page 293,
Uh-huh.
Champ finds his younger brother Kanan in possession of drugs after a meal out and immediately responds with anger until he says, "What I'm doing, what you do," causing the tone to completely shift. In your novel, there is a generational drug issue in terms of Grace's past use, Champ's current dealing, and Kanan's possession that is simultaneously killing them, but is what is keeping them alive by providing for them. As citizens and as rising healthcare providers, how can we break this cycle? And education is a preventative measure, but what do you see beyond education? What do you see necessary that is not currently provided in the healthcare system to help users stay use-free and get back on their
Man, I think by the time drug use becomes a healthcare issue, it's like almost out of your hands, right? Like to me, that's a social welfare issue. That's a poverty issue. That's a education issue, right? So by the time someone is already has experimented enough to have an addiction, I mean, I don't really know. I don't want to be a defeatist, but I don't really know what a healthcare professional could do unless this healthcare professional was there from like when they're Canaan's age, right? And to me, that's not even about health. That's about steering them to some kind of social programming, or, like they say, what is it that they can tell whether or not you're going to go to prison from your 4th grade reading scores. I think it's some kind of correlation. I'm not sure if that's the exact correlation, but like, if you're not catching people that young, by the time we 16, 17, 14, I mean, you're going to have to take your lumps and then just hope that that person takes a lump and wakes up. Like, luckily, I took a lump and it was a wake up lump. Some people take a lump, 3-4 lumps, and there's no wake up for them. So again, I don't want to be defeatist, but I think if it becomes a healthcare issue, that means there's already addiction involved. And man, watching my mother struggle with addiction for 30 years, like, I just don't, I don't know how religious you are, but it really feels like only grace can really help a person who's addicted to, we just look at Michael Williams, right? Like, having a great life, doing so much great work in the world, so much socially engaged, and still addiction. DMX, not to bring celebrities into this, obviously I just bring them in there because they're recent, but also because one would think that, there's a way in which people have all those resources that they wouldn't fall into these same cycles. But man, yeah, if you're already addicted, that's tough. I guess also there are like practical things like, what is the drug that can help you if you overdose? But like, that's not changing addiction. That's just keeping people from dying.
Yeah, Mitch, we just to jump in,
part of what we're trying to think about, and I'm reflecting upon with these young people, especially like Mike. So Mike got alopecia when he was a little kid, right? Little jockey boy, and then he developed alopecia. And then there was his family's response to his hair loss and the physician's kind of engagement. And it led to, it wasn't a positive outcome based on his narrative and what he's thinking about it. So as we read your book and think about Champ and Grayson, the real life situation that it came out of, we're trying to develop a more expansive notion of medicine, right? So so part of like some of the questions we have is like, like, did you know your pediatrician? Did you like the way your children do? Like, if your son stayed in, because your son was in New York, right?
Yeah.
Is he still with you?
Yeah, he's with me.
Well, wherever he is, he's gonna kind of know his doctor by name. Yeah. And like, what does it mean to grow up? Like, that kind of dynamic and phenomena usually happens in certain kinds of social contexts and class context. Right?
I didn't think about that. Yeah.
Right. So then, if you're not in that class context, as we think about two in pediatrics, what does it mean? How should pediatricians be thinking about the patients or clients who may be coming in less frequently or not at all to support that kid in the family?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Now I have some different ideas. So one, I didn't have a doctor when I was young because we were on welfare and you kind of just got whatever doctor you went to. I didn't go to the doctor much, but like I cannot remember knowing the single name of a doctor. That goes for a dentist, any kind of healthcare provider. I do think though, in the same way that they have like officer friendly in the schools because they want to make the police presence seem like it's not punitive. I do think because we have so much generational mistrust of doctors that it probably would be helpful for doctors to go into elementary schools in the same way and just to be human beings. Like, I'm a human being. I care about you. Here's what a doctor does. Here's what you can see me for. Here are the kind of resources. So I do think that would be helpful, not just for the kids also, but if a doctor really was about it, I feel like they would do the outreach with the family as well, because usually the parents are going to be the ones that hold these pathologies about healthcare, right? I also think, like in Doctors Without Borders or stuff, like people working in communities that are underserved, especially people of color working in communities that are underserved. Because I when I go look for, like I was just in Chicago and I was only there for a year. I thought I was going to have a doctor for a long time, and I purposely look for a Black woman, right? And it ain't a lot of Black women for me. And I was in Chicago. I have not chosen my doctor here in Arizona, but I am going to look for the same thing. So I think that the access that people of color or people who come from depressed communities have to great doctors who look like them, I think that's also invaluable. And yeah, just teaching them what a doctor does, right? Like a doctor can see you and also refer you to somewhere else. It doesn't always have, I always thought about a doctor in relationship to pain. Like if I'm going to see a doctor, it's because I'm messed up, or my mom is messed up, or someone I care about is messed up. And I think that to talk about preventative medicine, to talk about mental health, right? Even though, obviously an MD wouldn't be doing mental health, but like can refer you. I think all of that's important. And I wasn't thinking of it in that way. Yeah. So there are things I think, and I think it really starts, at that same age where you're catching kids.
85% of what primary care physicians see is mental health, right?
Okay.
So that's, that's, even though they may not treat it, that's because they're seeing everybody. That's why primary care is so important. So that's kind of, I just wanted to just kind of let you know where I was coming from. And interestingly, I just came from a board meeting. I don't know if they told you, at my kids' school, and the same issue is coming up with COVID. Like, how are we thinking about health in the school, right? In a private school with very elite families who are trying to navigate through COVID. It's like, we can leave it to the head of school, or we can bring in actual physician and public health folks to the school in its mission, because being a human being involves being well or ill or whatever, or having emotional or mental health crisis and stuff.
Yeah.
All right, who's next?
Okay, I was gonna go next, but my question is a little bit more of a switch. And I've
It's
watched
okay.
I watched the first segment of your film, the autobiography, and so I've kind of heard you talk about how this book is more of a story of redemption and kind of for you to redeem maybe the hurt you've caused others. And I know that for Champ, he really talks about his relationship with women in terms of the result of his own deep wounds. And I think when I was reading this story, I also kind of saw it as a story of redemption for your mom. And you write about kind of her role in your own wounds, but also her own wounds, and yet you guys show such like really tender love between the two of you. So I was just kind of curious what it was like to write your mother's own narrative like this.
Well, the book over those 14 years I was writing it began as only the story of Champ. And probably for half of the time, it was only his story. And then I realized that if I was going to tell this story, that I had to give voice to the mother. And I know that I was not doing that because I was scared. Because it would, in order to write a character, you have to empathize with them. You have to step into their shoes. You got to understand their experiences. And I was really resistant to doing that work. And a part of it was I didn't want to exacerbate any of my mother's wounds, because I knew I was going to have to talk to her a lot about things that were hurtful to her. But once I decided to do it, and then I asked her, I was like, this is what I'm doing, and this is what it's going to take from you. And she said, yeah, I'm if this is going to be helpful, then I'll do it. But it was very difficult territory for us. And one of the things that was really tough was doing the documentary. That documentary was the first time that I'd ever seen my parents together, like walking. I think there's like them walking down the street, down my old childhood street. Yeah, and I was 30 something years old, and I had never seen my parents just walk down the street together. But also in that same filming, I had this. So as a fiction writer, I fictionalize so much that sometimes I cannot separate the fictionalized version of my memory from what actually happened. So I had fictionalized my mother's first usage of crack, and I asked her about it, and she clarified it for me. And so then we drove to the place where it actually happened, and she told me the story. And that to me was a really emotional moment, because so much of my life came out of that moment and that night in that particular place. And so, yeah, it was like a traumatic experience to do that. But also I was very thankful for my mother's bravery, because she was opening herself up to criticism. She had to live in the same community. Like I was already living in New York, so like I didn't have to go back home, and I looked different in the book. So yeah, I was really thankful that she did that, and I learned a lot about her, and I also learned much more about myself. And then there's a moment in the book where so I wrote the book. I was working through and have been working through a lot of my own issues with women. More so, I wrote about it in Survival Math. But in the book, I had some really problematic scenes with women. And my editor, who was a woman or is a woman, she was like, Mitchell, you really need to take a look at these scenes, like, and why are you writing them this way, right? It's not just the scenes, it's like, where is this coming from? Where is this pathology coming from? So I went and looked, and I actually edited some of the scenes, but then I said, I can't edit them all, because if I do, it's no longer true to this character anymore. So I left them in, but then I also put in a kind of meta passage where I say, like, I know you're tired of these monologues. I'm tired of them too. And I don't want to be talking about. So it was like the reconciliation of knowing that I had these problematic ideas, knowing that I could revise all of them at this stage in my life, but also knowing that the 21-year-old me was not the 30-something-year-old person that was writing the book. So I had to leave them. But then also thinking about the audience and what my son will read and what other young men will read, and saying, like, I do need to point to the fact that this stuff is problematic.
Thank you. Did you originally write this as a fiction, or kind of how did you decide to write between fiction?
Yeah, it was always fiction. I mean, when I thought about, again, I started writing this in prison, and I only knew either it was a true story or it was not true. And because I was writing about people who were still doing some of the things that I write about in the book, I was like, I'm not about to be out here engaged with some, like, beefing because I didn't wrote about somebody in the book. So immediately I was like, oh, it has to be fictionalized. Yeah. And the further along I got into writing, I realized how much latitude fiction gave me. And I didn't want to be beholden to this actually happened. I didn't even have that good of a memory to do nonfiction. So I was really happy. And the other thing I think for people who write, I think that fiction, if you are a sentence-minded fiction writer, you have the most tools as a writer, because you think about the poetics of a line, you learn that, but you also learn structural things, plot. And I think if I had to come at it just from nonfiction, I might not have had those same tools. Like, I might not have known how to write a scene in the same way. So I was really thankful that my training was in fiction.
That's really cool. I think something else that really stood out to me just about from your writing was the way that you were able to kind of intersperse these narratives with those documents, with the drug treatment center intake form. I was kind of wondering what those documents really meant to you.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to, I'm always trying to look for, like, a shorthand way to communicate an idea. So the documents were, to me, like things that foregrounded important moments in the book, but also helped to define who these characters were. So, like, I think there's some custody papers in there, and there's a intake center form in there, and then there's like a church card, a mission card, and I can't remember what the other one is, but all of those things were meant to, like, mark important moments in these characters' lives, but also to kind of signal the broader touchstones for people in those kind of communities, right? Like, you got somebody who might got a drug problem. You got some people who fighting over their babies. You got some people who, so, like, how can I make this resonate with other people outside of the kind of the readers? And then I was thinking also that I actually did this before, but when I received the cover, the cover artist had marked, crossed out a novel, which I thought was pretty, I don't know, ingenious, if I can say it's ingenious, but I liked it. But I also thought, I once heard an interview with a woman named a writer named Tayari Jones. And Tayari said, a reader is always trying to catch a fiction writer telling the truth and a nonfiction writer telling a lie. And so I think if you can include things in nonfiction, so we're talking about realist fiction, right? So it's different than other genres, but in realist fiction, if you can include something that makes the reader question whether or not this is actually true, you heighten the experience for them. And so the documents were also meant to heighten the experience and make the reader ask, did this really happen? Like, is this a real grace? How much of this is true?
Thank you.
Hi, I would like to add that a lot of what you've said so far pretty much answered most of my questions of
Okay.
on the book. But I wanted to share that as an aspiring physician, I recently graduated from my university, and I've started a couple of different positions. And you're speaking of your novel resonating with like in-person real life a truth. For me, it reminded me of when I shadowed my personal or my primary care physician. And it was at a clinic where they served a large population of opioid dependent patients. And going in, I wasn't aware like this was the kind of community that they served. And shadowing them, I've witnessed like their path towards recovery and how difficult it can be to fall into relapse or even into withdrawal. And it's really interesting to me because I've discussed this with the physicians myself, and they just simply admit that, yeah, most physicians just simply don't want to even deal with those kind of patients. It's like risky for both ends, right? And to me, it was like such a like shocking moment because as physicians, it's our job, right, to help all communities regardless of what kind of problems they're facing with. And so I realized, like, in a sense, a lot of these individuals that are suffering from drug abuse or high dependence on these drugs, they're a highly underserved community.
Yeah.
And it really resonated with me when you spoke on 69. It was about Grace's attending the drug treatment center and the program. And you said that if you hadn't felt this, how could you ever really know what us addicts are up to against in this life of programs and counselors and sponsors, what we face because of or in spite of our earned expertise. And then later on, you also share once an addict, always an addict.
Yeah.
So I just want to see if you can speak to that, or like how you think that most physicians, would deal with these kinds of cycles of poverty and addiction.
Yeah. I don't know enough about physicians, but isn't there a certain oath that a physician takes, like that they have to treat patients? I don't know the oath, but I feel like even though you take that oath, it's really hard to approximate an experience with a group of people and empathy, right? And I think if you don't come in with that, like if you wanted to become a physician because your parents were physicians and you were good at science and physics and they sent you to the right schools and you want to pay off your loans quick, or they paid for, like there's a lot of reasons that you could become a physician that wouldn't necessarily mean that that's the kind of work that you want to do. So, and I don't know if I can, I guess I can fault them, because if you decide to become a physician, like it is your job, but it's like, I think it's in the case of addiction, it seems like a physician more often will have to go above and beyond the call of duty, right? And to me, that necessitates a level of empathy that you can't fake, right? Like you can't fake being empathetic. Either you are or you aren't. And so I mean, I think maybe what you all are doing is great, because it does make you think about another person's experience. It does humanize the people who have these addiction problems, who you're seeing at their lowest, right? But not as a person who was out in the world doing all of these great, who wanted to be a physician themselves or something, So like, I think, yeah, it's really important. And when you read that line back to me, the thing that struck me was earned expertise. Because nobody ever thinks that addiction is an expertise, but there are some expert addicts. Like they know where to get it, they know how to get clean, they know what to take. I remember when I used to smoke weed and I was young, they were like, man, if you taking a drug test, take this. And I'm like, you sure? Like that don't sound like something I should be taking. Like everybody builds up this expertise and is not really valuable to people outside of that world, but for them, it is expertise. And so I think I hope, I don't want people to have that kind of expertise, but I do think it's another way of looking at what they do and how they get to these spaces. But I'm thankful for you and going in, even if you went in there unbeknown that this was the kind of population that you were going to be working with, because that's so important. Like, and also it made me think about COVID too, how doctors is doing their thing, and then they was like, well, I didn't sign up for this. Like, I don't want to die in here like, I ain't got that many N95 masks, man. Y'all tripping. But again, you know, you signed up. And I wonder now too, because this is almost a question to post back to you all, because like when you first are in that situation, like I think there's a way in which you know that the addiction is not their fault, right? And then you try to help them, and maybe you get a little tired, but you understand that. But what happens, and it's less likely that you will get sick from treating them. But then what happens when you know that the decision-making process that has brought this person to see you is their fault, arguably, and also can get you sick. So like I wonder about that. How does that change the work that you're supposed to do as a doctor and how you think about empathy on the job? Because I know if one of my students get me sick, shit, they better not come back to class. I'm just playing. That's not true.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And I think a lot of experiences like shadowing and reading books like yours, they break a lot of these stereotypes of what this community is really like and the reasons behind their getting into this hustle.
Yeah.
And yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I just want to chime in, and I said, in this application cycle, I think medical schools are really, they've had to confront those people that just went in with that mindset, right? So they're looking for people who, for whatever it's worth, it's hard for me to articulate it in sort of academic language, but, to really treat grace, you have to have grace.
Yeah.
You have to, there's a level of selflessness and a kind of a human development that has to happen if you have somebody who's anti-vax that comes in infected and now they're expecting you to save their lives. When they were protesting against vaccination and masks and all of that, it takes a higher level of humanity.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
and I think that's what we're trying to cultivate here, like you said, that empathy, because you can't fake it, right? You can't fake it. And a lot of people, like you said, the narrative is, I like science and I want to help people, but who are the people that you know?
Yeah, right.
What happens when Grace comes into your clinic? Are you going to judge her? Do you have the deserving poor and the undeserving poor, the deserving sick and the undeserving sick? Or do you just treat all sick people?
Yeah.
That's what, what we're trying to move towards.
Man, that's hard work.
If you got a question? Is Smith out there?
Yes, I am. I'm sorry for the noise. I'm on my way back.
Turn the camera on. I want to see.
You can't see me because it's dark.
Okay.
Can you see me now? Oh, there's a light. Okay. Apologies if there's. Oh, wow. Okay. So my question is, on page 285, Grace tells her 3 sons during their hike to Smith Falls, you, me, us, we can't ever get trapped by who we were. Who we were is not who we are. So my questions are, can you unpack her revelation and how do we move beyond our past and what allows us to release ourselves from the past?
Oh, well, I think that is, it's kind of like on the one hand, it's a little bit of the kind of mantra of an addict that has to find a way to release themselves from their past. But I think in real life, I believe that you almost have to treat the past as like a text to understand, lest you find yourself making some of the same decisions that brought you to that place previously. And I think it's a really fine line between dwelling on what you've done and actually finding like a critical analysis of it so that you can learn from it. And I don't think grace ever reaches that level. And I don't actually know very many addicts that have reached that level. I think one of the beauties of what I do for a living is that it is constantly forcing me to evaluate the past, right? Like I talked about earlier about my friends who they don't have to engage with their past in the way that, I mean, you think about it, there are some jobs in which you could just get up and go to work every day and you don't really even have to think. Like everything you do is rote. Like your path to work is rote. You eat the same thing every day, pack your lunch, you go, you do your thing at your job, you stop by the bar on the way home, you watch a TV show, it's lights out, right? So like I am thankful that I don't have that kind of life. But yeah, for the people that do, I think you really, yeah, it's so hard. Like how do you, like I'm thinking about like Grace, where would she get that critical, like where would she get the skills necessary to reflect, right? It don't just happen, right? Like critical inquiry is actually a skill set that you learn probably in some institution. So you're already at a disadvantage. And if you are inclined not to revisit a traumatic past, then you're really messed up. So yeah, it sounds good. You know, a lot of stuff that, you know, I remember growing up with my mother, and she would say, when I was young, so probably for the first 10 years of her addiction, she would always say the right things. She would say the things that was going to give me hope. Like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do better. I'm going to go to rehab. I know I can't do this without help. I love my family. I won't take this anymore. And I'll believe that for the first about 10 years. And then we got past 10 years and I got to be an adult. And then I just stopped believing that language anymore. So I think it's really hard, which again, I guess we get back to like empathy. How much can you trust a person, right? Like how much can you trust the patient that comes in and says, I am going to be clean. Like this is the last time you're going to see me. Do you give them that trust? Or do you mistrust them and just prepare for them to come back later? And I don't know what you do. I know how I handled it was to believe for 10 years and then for me to start losing a little faith each time. And then finally to just put in my mind that it was going to happen forever. So there was a point in my life, probably by the time I reached, see what am I now, 46? By the time I reached 30, I said to myself, my mother's going to die an addict. And though I don't think it's going to be true now, at that point, it was what I needed to do to kind of separate myself from the trauma of every couple of months this was going to happen. And I needed that as like to prepare myself for it. And I don't think there was something like if she would have said, you know, who we are is behind us and we got it, I'd have been like, okay, mom, okay. But I hope you believe that. So the book in the narrative, it sounds great, and I want her to believe it, and I think she wants to believe it. In the real world, I believe for as long as I can possibly believe, and then I have to start making some critical analysis in my own life and trying to figure out how I can keep living while still loving.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Everybody got a chance to go? So can I ask my question? Because I've been feel like I shouldn't, but I have a question, man. And because I was trying to think what I could ask, and it's based on text. But now that my book is with the publisher, and now that I've written, and I don't still feel I'm waiting for to get the galleys back or whatever to work on it some more. But thinking about your book, and and I think I communicated this to you before. I've shared it on Facebook. Like I read it through the first time, and it's one of those books. Like one time one time I was, I was in a bookstore, and I literally read a book standing. Once I picked it up off the shelf, and then I bought it and took it home. It was one of those books where I kind of read like that. Those books you read, and at the end you're like, God, you're mad that there's no more.
Yeah.
But so then what I did was, because when I came out of the life, I read scripture for like 3 or 4 years, right? Because I needed to get saved and like get all that stuff out of me. Yeah. So I'm a scripture reader. So what I did one summer hanging out on the waterfront is I read a chapter a day, like scripture, and reflected on it. Because there's so much there. My homeboy Laracious, who was one of the guys that I was in a game with in LA, they either call him Rock or Champ. And then, you and I haven't been in a game. We've been in situations where we sold to grace and we looked at Little Champ.
Yeah.
And so, knowing, the reality of that situation, my question is like, and you don't have to share this because it may be too much, but like on a human level, right? And let me frame it like this too. In the medical school applications now, in the secondary essays, and even in the primary and secondaries, what they're looking for is deep reflection, right? They're looking for people who have thought and reflected deeply on like their motivations, but also on the human condition, right? And like what it means in social justice and caring for people in the populations they want to serve. So, this book on some level is fiction, but it's not. So I'm wondering, like, what was the deep revelation that, that came out of telling this story? Like, especially imagines that it's one thing, like you said, to tell them, autobiographical story, but then to try to excavate the truths out of that, and what your life lesson and how it turned you into the person you are today, both, imperfect, I guess, I don't know, maybe you're perfect now, but like your editor was like, hey, you need to look at these things and think about it. But to even be open enough to say, to be open enough, not for financial reasons, but for real human reasons, to look at that, look at how you think about women and your relationship to women. Like, what do you feel like was the greatest benefit of, not benefit is maybe not the right word, like the deepest transformative human truths that you learned in telling this story?
I think it was I think it's two things. One is you never really get over being a child, right? So like, I think about my mother and her childhood trauma of seeing her mother pass. And she talks about that. My mother's, she's 65 years old. And that happened when she was 5 years old. And she can talk about that thing like it happened 20 minutes ago. And there's just, her relationship with her father, all of her relationships are defined by that experience. And I didn't know as much about it when I was writing Residue. I learned a lot more about it when I was writing Survival Math. But yeah, I just how much that defined her life, and how much that trauma defined her brothers and her brother's life. So my uncles. And then, when I think about that, and I think about like how much her childhood trauma shaped the parent that she was, that then shaped my relationship, or who I came to be. The second thing, I used to tell this to my brother, who was the kind of model for Canaan, my youngest brother, and he never knew my mom as not addicted. Like, so she got addicted when he was 1, or maybe not even 1, and that lasted, so he never had a childhood without that. And he was angry, he was fighting and threatening people, and he was doing all the stuff. No, he didn't do all the stuff because he didn't join the gang, but he was acting up. And when he got to be about 18, I said, man, look, I know you hurting. Trust me, I know that you're hurting. I said, but don't nobody give a damn about your hurt when you're a grown man. Like they're going to judge you by what you do out in the world. And so you're gonna have to figure out, I didn't talk about, at this point, I was not talking about therapy or mental health. I was just like, you're gonna have to get it together, man. Because if you mess up your life, the people are gonna be like, oh, well, you had a bad childhood. Like, let's give you a pass. And so that was another thing I remember telling him, but I also felt that way about my life. Like, I don't think, like, when certain people hear my experience, they're like, oh my God, it was terrible. Then other people hear my experience, they're like, dog, like, you writing about this? Like, this is so commonplace. Like, why would you even mention this stuff? So I don't ever want that to be my currency, right? Like, I wrote about this stuff, but I don't want this stuff to define who I am. And, you know, I'm 46 years old now. No one really cares if I don't tell you, like, no one cares what happened to me. No one cares if I was in prison. Like, okay. And then the other thing was about women, which this was the book that really that was the comment by my editor, which really started me to thinking about my relationship to women and where it came from. I'm still doing that work, but I would not have done it. I certainly would not have done it that early and that deeply if I hadn't had a woman who I trusted, who wasn't trying to impugn me, but just saying, you really need to look at this. So those were the three things that I think I gained, particularly from writing The Residue Years. Your childhood trauma often defines you, but ultimately, no one's gonna care when you get to be an adult what your childhood trauma was. And then for me personally, I really need to take a look at the way my relationship to women and where it came from, which is really linked back to the first one about childhood trauma.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I mean, that second one really resonates because there is a time, there's an expiration date on people being compassionate because you had a tough childhood, right?
Yeah.
And especially for males, it's like, okay, that happened. I feel sorry for you, but you grown now.
Yeah. Once they hit you with you grown now, that's it for you and compassion, bruh. You better get
so you need to figure it out. You need to work it out. But yeah, man, that's powerful. Hey, Johnny, you want to wrap us up?
Yes.
Johannes.
Yes. Thank you, Professor Jackson. I think that we today learned a lot and was a very reflective experience for all of us. I particularly liked when you mentioned how, in your opinion, there could be a lot that could be done from healthcare providers going in the school and dismantling directly a possible medical mistrust that kids develop when they are, of course, very young and based on the environment they grew up in. So like how you have this sort of idea to dismantle this medical mistrust at the roots when kids start to develop their ideas on who to trust, who to believe in.
Yeah.
And so thank you for being here tonight and to discuss about your book, The Residue Years. It has been, of course, a great personal and professional growth for all of us as we aim to enter the healthcare field, being more empathetic and aware of American society in its multiple nuances. So thank you again, Professor Jackson.
Well, thank you all for the invitation. I really appreciate you reading so closely and quoting some lines back to me. I might have to go read this again myself.
Man, bless you, brother. Love you, man. I appreciate you, bro. We appreciate you.
Okay, have a good one.
Let me know next time you're back up in the Northwest.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.